Pamela.
Michigan has an intriguing premise, a survival horror where you're a cameraman for a news broadcasting agency that is tasked to investigate the mysterious mist that is transforming citizens that have been exposed to it. With 2 crew members joining you in this sordid, interesting, and clunky experience, you will at least be entertained by this short old PS2 game from the mid-2000s. It's developed by Grasshopper Manufacture and published by Spike in Japan and 505 Game Street in the US. Spoiler warning for anyone that doesn't want to know about the story. The story is sandwiched with a well-rounded story that wants people to take it seriously but has the issue of trying to juggle it with badly animated anime-inspired interactions and very odd eroticism being at play. At times, there were moments I got filled with tension and fear by going into dangerous areas that made me pee 4 times in a row. It was that good.
I doubt there's anything useful in here.
Gotta be an infrared unit around here somewhere. Yikes!
Then there are times with drastic mood shifts. You'll be going from people disappearing mysteriously or getting ruthlessly murdered and trying to film what's happening. The next moment you'll be joking about BDSM with the crew and having living proof as an example. While I love the duality of the game, it's not doing itself any favors with a very rushed storyline that leaves a lot of the real meat of the story up in the air for interpretation but has the time to show dirty magazines instead. I had some laughs in its attempts to insinuate adult humor. It is a double-edged sword because it's immersion-breaking at times. The ending is a big letdown with a cliffhanger to boot. There's no climactic last level. Near the last level, when you discovered what was causing the fog, it was one of the weirdest and most jarring way to reveal a big mystery. The game has interesting characterization of the main trio, them encompassing key archetypes, the get everything done no matter what the cost is character, the character that fucking gives a shit, and the persona MC that barely talks character. They argue and bicker at times. I thought this would have been a gold mine of a mechanic where you either choose between either doing your job or doing the morally right thing, and they do implement this half correctly. Take for example, there's a person in need of help but is getting eaten by a monster. You have the choice of either filming her demise as it happens or stop recording it. I would like to add that you won't help that character at all either way. You will have the same outcome for either of filming something horrific or doing the moral thing. This is a very poor illusion of choice, but luckily there are times where they kind of do get this right, but you don't really feel consequences of your actions because it gets slapdashed. For example, you have the option of saving your coworker from an assault by a monster that somehow knows how to operate an elevator. I'm getting off track. Sorry, there's just so many questions I have with no resolution presented by the game. Some would say this is mystique. I call it poor planning and lack of exposition. Anyway, the life of the reporter is in your hands to control. Her fate is in your hands. Then you realize she's replaceable.
Today's winner, today's kid reporter is Deirdre Shores. It's you, Deirdre, it's you.
It's you, Deirdre.
It's you.
Huh?
You
You're the
won.
winner. You're today's kid show, kid reporter winner.
The problem of the game is, it tries to have the facade of a complex game, where your choices matter, but it's sorely lacking in many areas that makes it extremely bare bones and lackluster, which sinks at the bottom of the barrel of mediocrity. The cutscenes is its best asset, the pre-rendered cutscenes specifically. The in-game cutscenes are non-existent because technically you control the cutscenes since you're the cameraman observing everything. The voice acting is serviceable but lacks accurate relaying of certain emotions, and with very odd direction that made me think of this as a campy comedy horror game and I couldn't take it seriously at all, which does work in the game's favor because you let your guard down and be vulnerable for a jump scare. Too bad it doesn't have a lot of jump scares. And a rule of thumb from horror video game veterans, jump scares isn't preferable to make a player feel scared because it's the easiest and cheapest trick in the book, so for me to encourage this way of scaring players is just, well, I think you can fill in the gaps. Talking about gaps, earlier I said that the story doesn't give enough information about the setting of the game. There are logs and books that thickens the plot, but there is still a lot of unexplained events. The game reaches for the stars, literally. If the bioengineered virus wasn't enough for you, there are hints of aliens, ghosts and a Yeti sighting. While I am fine with the aliens and Yeti being more of an Easter egg, the ghosts I feel should have been explored more often because they are more prominent in comparison to the others in the game, and this is my biggest critique of the game. It doesn't adequately explore certain plot points in the story and leaves many events up for interpretation. Like how and why a single person excrete infectious mist in the surrounding area. Why is there a UFO in the sky? How can these monsters know how to operate an elevator but doesn't know how to open a door? From a gameplay standpoint, it's an immersive, frustrating experience that almost made me consider it paltry. The game starts off with camera icons around your screen. You'll be able to use your camera's midpoint icon to examine certain objects that triggers a dot inside it. You can push/attack objects, enemies, and your own crew members. You'll be interacting with items and objects more so than fighting, which I like because my personal preference is to not be confrontational in horror games. I like that you aren't the one to shoot enemies yourself because it's difficult to aim a gun while holding a big ass camera, so the believability factor is good. Is good. What is not good though, is the annoying AI. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I thought that Briscoe is high on mushrooms and blocking my path and doors when turning around to check if I missed something. Yes, he follows you almost always when traversing the environment. At first it was a bit awkward and does getting used to at first. The way the gameplay progresses are not your typical horror game. The reporter is the one that takes the lead, and you'll need to accommodate her when opening doors and objects needed to progress the story. The reporter is basically a glorified radar. She's where you're supposed to go to examine and find items or objects to progress forward. From playing a myriad of horror games, I got accustomed to taking the lead. It's a refreshing yet inorganic way to play the game. The main issue I have with this is that the reporter will sometimes travel on her own to some place on her own, and you'll have to try and find her if you don't pay attention to her. Also, there's this train level that really shows how unnatural the progression can be. The reporter goes on her own to a dead body to examine it on the far right side of the area. How would she know there was a dead body there in the first place? Because the fog is thicker than Chun-Li and she couldn't possibly see a thing. So how does this make sense? Wouldn't it have made more sense if you took the lead and the other crew members followed you instead? This would have made a whole lot more sense if she examined other non-important objects in the area, rather than always being on the nose with finding key items. Luckily, searching for the reporter only happened 2 times, and I only had the epiphany near the end of the game, so it's not so grating. Battles with infected, malformed humans is more akin to interactable cutscenes because you'll be using the items in the surroundings to damage them. There are encounters with these little spider-like monsters from time to time. Aiming your camera and pressing cross towards them will let the reporter mow it down. The graphics is not bad, it's above average. Although the reporter has shoulders that are as sharp as Lara Croft's boobs. It does use a lot of fog to save resources, I think. Luckily it ties in with the mysterious mist problem in the city. The game uses the same animations more than Genshin Impact. It does show its budget limits. This is particularly noticeable when you talk to your boss in their office. If it wasn't for the campy humorousness of the characters, this would have been glaringly monotonous of epic proportions. I did get a few laughs of it, like Briscoe repeatedly doing the same animations over and over again. There was also this point in the first level that made me think he was the Grim Reaper.
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
If you like a campy horror game that you don't want to take seriously and want a few good laughs for mostly the wrong reasons, I recommend this game if you can find it. Hardcore horror veterans might struggle with this game. It's an average bare bones game that tries to show complexity and it has a learning curve.